What is going on, ladies and gents? Welcome to VeVe Investments. On today's episode, we're going to be recapping David's last interview with 101 Pop. So if you guys are interested, make sure to stay tuned. We discuss 12 points in this episode. So this past week, David sat down with yet another YouTube channel and answered some more questions about the project. It was actually quite an interesting interview. So as I mentioned, I broke the interview down into 12 different points. So with that being said, let's hop right into the first one. So the first question brought up in the interview is, what are VeVe's growth objectives for the next 5 years? David pretty much goes on to talk about how they don't measure their success based off their sales volume necessarily. He uses the bear market as an example, and he says that if a collectible is trading for $100 and then drops down to $50 in the bear market, the value is cut in half, and so the overall market actually has an impact on this. So he says what's more important is the amount of collectibles they've actually minted on the blockchain, and that's somewhere between 8.5 and 9 million collectibles. Another metric for tracking their success is going to be the amount of wallets that actually hold collectibles and are active on the platform. He then goes on to say that secondary market transactions have now reached over $1 billion GMV, or gross merchandise value, and that these transactions have actually slowed down. Now he says that this doesn't necessarily mean because demand's disappearing. He said it could be because of the value of these collectibles in the market, which again brings me right back to that bear market example with the $100 collectible dropping down to 50. He says that their 3, 5, and 10-year goals have been set. They have a goal of 1 million active users within 2 to 3 years from now. And then he also says that they're going to begin measuring user-generated content. So how often people are posting VeVe content, the engagement on that content, so how many likes, comments, and shares the posts are getting. And he says this would be a way to capture a larger market share. Davis says that they've started adding more key personnel to the company's marketing department, and that we can expect mass marketing to begin soon. He said that up until this point, they've been waiting to push KYC, and he did confirm that this has now been done. And this is going to allow users to experience the app without having to deal with any of those initial roadblocks. Now, David didn't mention this, but I would also argue that the VeVeVerse should be released before mass marketing begins. Just given the amount of issues they tend to have when releasing features, you don't want tons of people flocking to the app and then still having to wait for the VeVeVerse or experiencing a bunch of bugs. It's better to test that stuff with a smaller group, hence the reason why there's only 50 people in the beta. The VeVeVerse was originally announced for 2021. If they released it back then, I'd argue it would have failed. So before mass marketing, in my personal opinion, I think the VeVeVerse should be open. So this was quite interesting to hear, because up until this point, I don't know about you guys, but I haven't heard anything about this. The team has another secret project that they're working on in the background. So David says that they have other projects that they believe could be additional groundbreaking industries that the company could eventually get into in the future. So I have no idea what this could be at all. I know the secure wallet is something that they were working on years ago. They've been really quiet about the project for years now. And one thing I also noticed is that, there was a lot of buzz and people talking about the fact that they deleted their videos on their Akomi channel. I didn't see a single comment about somebody talking about the fact that they still had one remaining, and it's the secure wallet. I did also see VeVe respond to someone's tweet who asked if we could potentially buy Omi in the future, and they said that they're looking into it. So I don't know if that could be something as well, like an actual exchange on the platform. But David says that this is a way for VeVe to ensure that they stay ahead of the market curve. Next up, they talk about Japanese IP. So David says that it's harder to acquire due to more moving parts. So he says that there's various writers, producers, and other entities who own various different parts of the intellectual property. So the team actually has to work through each and every stakeholder in order to acquire the license. So David says it's a longer process. He also says, and I quote, "Anime is going to be a major part when that part of the market, Asia, catches up." So he says that up until this point, his focus for the early success of VeVe has been on the Western market. A large part of his goal moving forward now is Eastern adoption. And then he also says, and I quote again, "Rest assured, the greater Asian market will be significant." So they move on to talk about The Little Prince, and David's asked if the book could ever drop on VeVe. He says that a representation of a digital collectible book with a cover that you can't physically buy is something that's definitely doable. It's been confirmed that there's going to be 3 collectibles for The Small Prince, And David says that the next two are even better than the first. And then he also goes on to say that we can start to see more geo-targeted IP. So more IP pertaining to specific regions around the world. He brings up two examples. He says significant items from Asia, and then also stuff pertaining to French history. They then talk about signing collectibles. So this was interesting. We know on platforms like McFarlane, they now offer one-of-one signatures. And when asked, David says that they're looking at ways to make collectibles more unique and one-of-ones. So he actually says that adding signatures right now wouldn't be too difficult, but they want to ensure that collectors actually meet the artists and get the signature made out in their name. So I've talked about in the past how there have been multiple discussions that exemplify how well David actually knows the collecting space. I mean, he's a big nerd himself, right? This right here is another example. So not only will the signature that's made out in your name now be on the blockchain, but in my opinion, that's way more authentic and personable. Because if I buy a collectible that has a signature from an artist that I may not even know, right? I may look at that and go, oh, that's cool, right? And again, I understand on platforms like McFarlane, it's still considered a one-of-one signature. But not only do I have a signature made out directly to me, but I also have a memory tied to that now. So I love that David recognizes this, and he does say that they're going to be looking for ways to implement something like it. So OpenSea now allows you to swap your NFTs, and this was brought up to David, asking if this would ever be a thing on VeVe. David says that VeVe was never built for peer-to-peer swaps, so it doesn't have the infrastructure in place. He says that it would take time to build this feature. A concern that they have, and this would be in a very similar way to transfers, is that it could be a way for people to launder collectibles. So he uses the example that if a $50,000 Donnie gets traded for, a Mermicorno, obviously those two collectibles don't have equal value. So until they figure out a better system, David's not really comfortable with rolling this out, because he wants things to become more clear. He was quite clear in saying that it's a liability for the business right now. Obviously, the collectibles, like we just discussed, need to be of similar or equal value. So they need to have a system in place there. They need to ensure security, because just like a company like GoFundMe, right? When you're raising funds, GoFundMe is holding those funds. So they're responsible for them. They have to hold them securely, right? So VeVe in this case would be the middleman responsible. And then they just need to ensure compliance with regulatory standards overall. Somebody can claim that they've been scammed when in fact they haven't been, and then it just becomes this whole process. So they then go on to talk about comics, and David says that they're looking for new ways to improve the reading experience. David, if you're watching this, panel to panel reading, please. He says that you can count the main comic publishers on one hand. There's dozens of independent publishers, and that VeVe will be introducing some of these independent publishers on the platform. He says that they're also working with artists to bring out their own comics, and that the first phygital comic, that says digital, I meant to say phygital, can be expected in the next few months, and he says it's extremely exclusive. Now, in terms of phase 1 of the VeVeVerse, this was a little disappointing for me to hear. We're not actually allowed to import assets outside of what VeVe provides during phase 1. This is to ensure that their brand's IPs are not misused or misrepresented with other objects. He also says that they want to ensure VeVe aesthetics. So you don't want to open up the VeVeVerse and then all of a sudden see worlds built where 90% of them are 3D models and 10% are VeVe assets. He says that he wants to see people in the community take VeVe assets to the next level. Now, with that being said, David did say that this is something we can probably expect in later phases, as well as being able to import other collectibles. I'm pretty sure Fish are already compatible though. They were in the unveiling. Second to last, we got renting. So something we haven't talked about in a little bit, but David says it's something we can possibly do in the VeVeVerse. Now, might I add that when David did say this, he was smirking quite a bit, and David, renting has also been confirmed in the past, which is also kind of funny, so. But he refers to his World of Warcraft days and how he would rent out his rare white tiger to other players who would want to ride it around. He was clear in saying, though, that the mechanism behind how we would rent our collectibles is something that the team is still figuring out. And last but not least, they asked David what the Marvel Mighties are going to be used for. So obviously he didn't say, but in the process of trying not to give up any information, he did slip up. At least I think. In David's words, he says, stay tuned for what we're doing in that program. So they clearly have something going on behind the scenes with these pieces. He says that the series are a way to ensure a new entry-level price for the app, He actually says their 13 gem price point sits above and below the average price of a Funko Pop. They also provide a style that's been proven successful in markets around the world. That style being, you know, that cute, childish approach. Childish maybe isn't the best word, but cartoon's probably a better one. And then he also says, and I didn't know this, there was a Marvel Mighty's comic cover that was actually redeemed at Comic-Con. So I don't know if anyone has a photo of this, but I'd love to see it. Maybe you want to toss a photo over on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. Such a stupid name. Yeah, tag me in it, and I'd love to see it. Ladies and gents, that's going to conclude today's episode. Now, one more bit of information I'll include here. I just don't have a slide for it. But just before I wrap things up, they are also going to be having a Rabbids drop coming up relatively soon, David says. He did talk a little bit about the Ubisoft license over in France, but nothing more than what we already know, which is why I didn't include it in this video. But while speaking about that, he did say that Rabbids are coming up on the app, so you guys can expect a Series 2. As for the video I talked about with my old games, I am still trying to put that together. I'm just struggling to find a power cord. It's like a 15-year-old plus console, so bear with me, but I am still putting that together. But if you guys enjoy the content, make sure to like and subscribe. Comment down below what you want to see in a future episode. And as for our next, I'll catch you then.